Hello and welcome to the Bible Matters podcast. In this episode, we have our first ever live recording of the podcast. It was a recording we did last year at Ashburnham Place in East Sussex. And Tiff and I, we sat down with 3 gospel partners to talk about their work in taking the gospel to their workplaces. There are 3 partners in 3 different cities across the world, and we wanted to know what it was like for them to be Christians at work trying to share the gospel with their colleagues. We were joined by a live studio audience and we had a really good time making this episode. We really hope that you enjoy it and you find it a real encouragement for your own ministry to your workplace. My name is Leo Elborn and this is the Bible Matters podcast, encouraging faithful Bible teaching and ministry. Well, it's wonderful to be recording this episode live at Ashburnham in East Sussex. And I'm joined today, as usual, by my wonderful co-host, Tiff Carter-Whitley. Hello, Tiff.
Hi, Leo. It is great to be here today. And it's wonderful that we are joined by our panel. We have 3 guests, and they are...
My name's Thierry Richards. I have been in Tokyo for 13 and a half years, doing kind of church planting work in central Tokyo.
And I'm Caroline Engel. I currently live in Paris and I have been working in finance for 18 years.
Mark Cooper. I'm an actuary and I work in an insurance company in London.
And it's wonderful that today we are joined by a live audience. So hello, audience.
The subject of this episode is the gospel at work, stories of teaching the Bible in the workplace. And just as we begin, I would love to take you back some years ago. I had recently graduated, the world was my oyster, and I just managed to land my first job in investment management. In truth, I knew very little about finance, but was fresh-faced and full of enthusiasm, as opposed to when I left, and I had wrinkles and dark rings, and still knew little about finance. But I did know one thing. I was firmly convicted of the call to all Christians to tell people about Jesus and take the gospel to the world. And if you're listening, if you're here this afternoon, perhaps you are convicted of that as well. But I had a problem. I had my church commitments, I had newfound work commitments, but after all that, I didn't have a lot of free time for evangelism. My plan was that with the slither of hours I had left in my week, I was going to use them to commit to a social club or a group of friends or a sports team in order to fulfill that call of evangelism. But the problem was that, when after work, after the commute, after church, with that very little time I had left, I had almost no energy to do it. And so I had this conviction, this awareness to tell people about Jesus, but I looked at my diary and I thought, I'm sorry, God, I just can't fit it in. And maybe that's you here today. Maybe that's you every time you hear someone talk about evangelism. You think, that sounds great, but I just don't have the time, the energy to do it. And then one day, I sat in a talk and the preacher said something that changed how I viewed my entire life. He said, if you don't see your workplace as your mission fields, you will never end up doing evangelism. And what he meant is that if you treat your work life and your evangelistic pursuits as separate categories, you're simply never going to get the time to do the work of telling people about Jesus. But if you consider your work life to be your evangelism, that is how you will fulfill the commission Jesus has given of making disciples of all nations. And what I realized that day was that God had not put me in the workplace because I was a good investment manager. In fact, to be honest, that had been clear for quite some time. But God had put me in my workplace so that I could hold out the gospel to those around me. As I went on, I realized this wasn't just a modern phenomenon. It had been that way since the start. Somebody pointed out one day that when it came to the Apostle Paul and his missionary journeys, Well, in the book of Acts, we only have a small snapshot of a work that covered decades. But from what we understand, the way Paul conducted his missionary journeys was that he would go from city to city, and in his spare time, he would reason in the synagogue. But for the bulk of his time, he would be working. He was a tent maker. And our understanding of how he worked is that he would take his wares down to the market, he would sell his tents, and he would tell the gospel to those around him. You see, Paul realized that Jesus is Lord. He is Lord of all. And so his message wasn't just a message for the synagogue, it was a message for everywhere. He was king of the marketplace as much as he was king of the place of worship. Jesus was king of the workplace as much as he was king of the sacred space. And it struck me, the greatest missionary in history accomplished his 3 greatest mission trips by simply going to work. You see, if we are Christians, we are missionaries to wherever the Lord has placed us. Just as Hudson Taylor was a missionary to China, Elizabeth Elliot was a missionary to Ecuador. Well, we are missionaries to the school, the university, the hospital, the construction site, the cafe, the restaurant, the office, whatever job the Lord has placed us in. And with all of this in mind, I'd love to turn to our panel. And Thierry, could we possibly start with you? As you've said, you live and you work in Tokyo, working as the pastor of a church, but you're also trying to train people in workplace ministry, like we've described. Can you just set the scene for us? Can you give us a sense of what the reception of Christianity is like in Japan?
Thank you very much indeed. I think my summary answer would be irrelevant. So for most people, they just consider it to be irrelevant, almost like if you were to think of some philosophy, stoicism or something. You might think, okay, vaguely interesting perhaps, nothing to do with me. If I wanted to study it, fine, but really nothing to do with me. So irrelevant, I think, is my summary answer. But just each person is so different. I remember some years ago, actually, I researched some of the people in the area, the kind of financial district in central Tokyo, and just asked them various questions along these lines. And what I found was that probably 2/3 of people in Japan have come from a normal sort of Japanese schooling background. And for them, they'd have this sort of worldview, which is sort of Shintoistic, so God's in everything. And for them, sort of to be Japanese is to have this kind of worldview. And so Christianity would be, irrelevant and slightly non-Japanese. It's foreign.
Yeah.
And then another, probably 1/3 of people have actually been through some kind of a Christian education. And so maybe their school or their nursery or their university had Christian foundations. So for those guys, actually there's something of a one God, or the kind of morality of Christianity is in some way kind of normal or familiar. And so those two people have such different responses, actually.
So there is a kind of awareness, but in respect to it not being for me.
Yeah, exactly. And then if I just put one other category of people that you get is people who feel it's like a cult. This is just not for me. This is dangerous. There's one couple that Antonio and I worked with years ago, actually. They were overseas at the time. And we met them, lovely couple. We kind of got chatting and, we were interested in Japan and they were Japanese and, really good kind of relationship. They found out that we were Christian. And when they found out, they were so standoffish.
Oh, really?
And the reason was that back in the 90s, the girl, the wife, had been on the Tokyo metro when there was something called a sarin gas attack. And, this kind of Christian-affiliated cult had basically put sarin gas on like the metro system, the underground system, and lots of people had been killed. And because of that, actually, throughout Japan, there's a real thought of what they describe as new religions. Anything non-Japanese is cult-like, and it's going to cause people to do crazy things. It's dangerous. And actually, Christianity would be grouped in with that, I think. And so there would be that sense of cult-like, dangerous, the way you might think of a Mormon or someone like that.
That's very interesting. Caroline, can we turn to you? You work in finance in France. Now, in France, I think some people would say it has a Christian history. How does this influence how people hear the gospel now?
I would say very similarly to Thierry, that France has two categories of people. You have the people who are still emotionally attached to Roman Catholicism. And a recent survey said it's 50%. So it's not a small number. And then you have the people who are directly inheritors from the revolution. And, you know, when they chopped the head of the king, they were just like, let's chop the head of God at the same time. and yeah, they really wanted to do away with God. And so unlike, you know, I lived in the UK 12 years before that. And unlike the UK, where you have the king and he's the representative of the church, in France, it's a very clear divide between the state and religion. And it really permeates all the culture. So similar to Japan.
And Mark, you're in London working in insurance. What
pension insurance, Tiff, I will have you know. Yeah.
Even more exciting.
The most interesting insurance there
The
is.
only way to make pensions even more interesting, I think.
Mark, what motivates you to hold out the gospel to those that you're working with?
Yeah, I think what Leo said in his introduction was really helpful. I think I grew up in a church where what ministry, evangelism, very much centered around what was happening in our local church. I don't live in London, I live outside of London. And so the idea of going to work, it was a different thing and not something where you think about doing Christian ministry. And I think, you know, as Leo said, if we are convicted that the gospel is good news, and I do believe that, it's good news for sinners like me, then why wouldn't we not bring that to the workplace? And, you know, the other thing is I've been in my company for 13 years and I have some, you know, really strong relationships with people there. And is the gospel good news for them? Yes, the gospel is good news for them. And so, you know, that's why I'm motivated to try and share it with them. Now, that does come with a cost. You know, it does come with kind of laying down some of your reputation. But that's the trade-off that you face.
Were you always convinced of that? Or was it you started your career with this conviction that the gospel is for your colleagues? Or has there been something or a time along the way which has helped convict you of that?
Yeah, I definitely think that we need to grow a conviction in ourselves that the gospel is good news for our colleagues. And so coming to lunchtime talks, having good Bible teaching in our church has definitely grown that conviction in me, and that, yeah, the gospel isn't just my private thing, the thing that helps me get through life, but actually it's good news for all the world, including my colleagues.
Caroline, you said that people, they want to treat religion and I suppose all other matters of life very separately. That's very different, I suppose, to what Mark has been saying, and I think what you're convicted of as well. So what would you say to someone, one of your colleagues or someone at church, who says, well, you should leave your faith out of the workplace?
I mean, ultimately, even the 50% who are emotionally attached to the Roman Catholicism will treat religion as very secret garden. It's very for the inner life. And so whenever I'm there trying to engage with people, it's you face a wall. And my rationale has been, look, we work in finance, we work super long hours, it's 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, 47 weeks a year. Like, these people spend more time with me than they will spend with their family and friends. And God doesn't do things randomly. He has placed me there with them so that I could question the vanity of their life, you know? Like, most people will spend their time trying to accumulate wealth, power, reputation, and anything that goes with it. They will spend their life doing that. And it's my firm conviction that God has placed me there. It's not my company who made me an offer 17 years ago or 18 years ago. It's God who said, this is the job. Do you want it? And come and work for me there. And we have to be convicted of this. Like, we work for God first and foremost. And those people, it's a treasure that we hold, and those people, they need to hear about that treasure.
And Caroline, just in terms of how you came to learn those truths, were you always convicted of that, or was there a time where you felt particularly gripped by that truth?
You know, it's similar actually to Mark. So I went to a good Bible teaching and church, and we had weekends away. And I remember at one of the weekend away, it was at the beginning of my time in London and the beginning of my career. And it was Roger Carswell who preached a sermon on 1 Samuel 14. And you know what? It's a teeny story. You could not even pay attention to it. But it's the story of Jonathan and his arms bearer. And Jonathan's just like, you know what? Let's go and give a kicking to those Philistines. And let's see if God is working with us. And Carswell was like, guys, just go for it. Do something and see. Maybe God will work for you. That's the exact word in the Bible. And this really kickstarted my evangelism at work. I was just like, just do something, Caroline. Talk to people. It's as simple as saying, hey, what did you do this weekend? Do you want me to tell you about my weekend? Or the thing that I organized straight after, because I remember it was a November weekend away, and I organized Christmas carols. I was just like, right, I'm going to organize Christmas carols. I'm not going to ask anyone's permission. I'm just going to, print flyers and put them on the desks and invite everyone and ask some musician at church to come and the pastor in the local community to come. And that was it, and then people came. And it was just do something and let's see if the Lord will work.
That is so helpful. Thierry, you're in a slightly different position working for a church. How do you teach people that taking the gospel to the workplace is worth it?
Yeah, thank you. In some ways, very similar to Caroline has mentioned there, that sense of God sending you to the workplace, really trying to teach people to understand that. We've been running a course where we do sort of evangelism in the workplace training. And one of our staff team, a guy, Endo-san, has spent, he's 70 now? So he spent 40 years in Japanese workplaces. And he teaches the course primarily. And essentially what he's done over those 40 years is simply understand the Lord has sent him to the workplace. And he's been in HR in lots of kind of big companies in the sort of middle of the financial district. And each morning on the way into work, he would just be on the train, and there's a particular bridge that he kind of gets to. And when he gets to the beginning of that bridge, the uphill section, he'll start praying. And he'll start praying for each of his colleagues by name. And he's just done that for 40 years, actually. He'd pray for them by name. And then through the week, he'd just try and use his lunch times wisely. And he'd really try and do just one-on-one times with colleagues, just a one-on-one time, go for lunch with them. And he'd have kind of ring-fenced a couple of 2-3 lunch times a week for that purpose. And over those 40 years, the Lord has really used that, actually, and has seen, we think, actually, between 50 and 100 of his colleagues become Christians.
Wow.
And again, not rocket science, but all he's doing is just praying for them, trying to love them, trying to spend one-on-one time with them. And so we've put that into a course where we just try and train other Japanese guys to do the same. And
you mentioned something there, that helping people understand that God has sent them to the workplace. It's such a simple point, but so helpful. It unlocks the whole purpose of going to work, not just primarily to do your job, but because God has sent you.
Yeah, I think absolutely huge, actually. So many people. There's one guy who took that course, a guy called, let me describe him as Mr. N. He works at a kind of big trading company in central Tokyo. And he's 52, 53 now. And so he took this course last year. And he described himself on that course. I spoke to him about a week after he'd done the course. And he described his work actually up until then in the trading company as being, it's like he's not loved the people that he's been working with, was how he described it. Because he's felt like he's gone to work. Okay, he's quite good at his work. He stayed there a long time. He just does his work. But he's a Christian. He doesn't see how the two relate to each other. But on doing the course, he's really understood something. If the Lord sent him there for the sake of those around him, will he love them? Was how he described it. I thought it was fascinating, actually.
I was so blessed when I first started working that there was only one other Christian in the company. Thankfully, he was the head of HR, which was quite remarkable. But he very generously just said to me, why don't we meet every other week before work, and we'll just pray for our colleagues and pray that they'll have an opportunity to hear the gospel. And it just changed my mindset so totally, actually, that I wasn't there really. Well, I wanted to do a good job, do good work, but I was there actually to reach those around me.
Yeah, completely.
Just on it, Thierry, obviously, I suppose these ideas might not be natural to, anyone, I guess, but particularly in your culture where you've said Christianity is more of just a matter of interest. With Christians who've never considered workplace ministry before, how might you encourage those people?
Massively need support. I mean, I think it's the same anywhere in the world, actually. But in these Japanese guys, they for example, the number of Christians in Japan is, in the area we're in, I think it's about 0.3%. So you think of a building, if there are 3 floors, 100 people on each floor, there'll be 1 Christian on 3 floors of a 30-floor building. So in a 3,000 person building, there might be 10 Christians. Okay. They don't know each other. They all feel they're on their own. It's like the whole of the workplace, to a floor above, a floor below, and my floor against me kind of feel, and irrelevant, don't want to stick their head above the pulpit, don't want to be thought of as like a Mormon or a cult, But if they can get to know others in their building, wow, it's such a difference. Like this guy in the trading company, we've started a group actually for his company, and 4 to 6 of them meet once a month. Okay. And they've just been such an encouragement to each other, actually.
Praise
so
God.
meeting regularly, and then us just do one-on-one with them. And they get a chance to just read the Bible and hear from God about who they are and all that they have in Christ.
Caroline, you had formed these convictions of speaking of Jesus at work. How did you then begin putting them into practice?
So when I moved to France, I tried to replicate this spray wide and then follow up, because after I organized the Christmas carol, then I would invite people who had attended and expressed some sort of interest to evangelistic event at church, and then I would continue the conversation around the coffee machine or anything like that. And when I was in France, I was just like, right, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to spray wide and then follow on. And so second Christmas I arrived, I wanted to give away little evangelistic Christmas booklets. So I formed little packs, and there was like super nice chocolate in it, and stickers and the booklets. And I put in each coffee point in the building with a little note that said, if you want to know the true story about Christmas, help yourself.
Was it British Cadbury's?
No, it was Lindt. It was Belgian chocolate.
Yeah,
We're in France, my friend.
I think that's where you went wrong, personally.
So that's what I did, and the packs disappeared. I think everybody was interested in the chocolate. And after a few days, I got a call from HR, and they were just like, someone's complained there's Christian literature at the coffee point. Huh. And I'm going to cut it short, but basically 3 months later, the investigation closed, and I had like a warning from HR. And I was like, okay, maybe spray wide and then follow on is not a good method for France. And the Lord gives us also wisdom to just think about who we're dealing with and just adapt our methods.
So just to clarify, the thing that had been complained about was that you just distributed a bit of Christian literature?
I didn't even distribute them. I put them and I said, help yourself if you're interested.
Okay.
So it was, and you can see this anywhere, people will just say, this is outrageous. I hate Christian literature. Let's make sure it's removed and the person who did that is punished. So then I decided, okay, I'm just going to go one-on-one. And this is what I've been doing since. I have a super busy day. I usually sit at 8:30 and then don't leave my desk till 6:30 in the evening. So it's when I go on business trips, I'll take some colleagues with me. We're gonna have some time unwinding before client dinner, and then I'm just gonna open up to them. And in the last 3 weeks, that's what happened with 2 of my colleagues. I took a very young trader with me to Greece. and she's 26 years old, and she just came back from Glastonbury, and then she was supposed to go to the to an election, a British election party, the Thursday when we're coming back, and then dinner with friends on Friday, and then Netflix on Saturday, and she was like laying the whole thing. And I looked at her and I was like, whoa, that's a lot of events that you are filling up your life with. Have you found a purpose to your life?
And you're her boss, just to clarify.
No, not at
okay.
all. I'm just a fellow colleague.
Okay, wow.
And I, because it sounded like she was really trying to fit it up so that she wouldn't have to think. Have you found a purpose to your life? And before that, I had just prayed and I said, Lord, this time is for you. Just make it happen, Tell me what question to ask. And he just inspired me that question. And God is very faithful to answer those kind of questions.
How, just out of interest, how did she respond?
She answered the exact same as my other colleague. No, I'm still looking. And my friends, those people who surround us in our daily lives, for those who are in an office, at work, they are looking. They're thirsty and they're hungry and they carry this weight of guilt and doubts, and they just need someone to tell them about the living water and about the bread of life and about the one who blots out everything. They're hungry for it. And we just need to share that treasure with them.
Thierry, I'd love to ask you, what about in Japan? What kind of initiatives have you been setting up and how have they gone for you and those you're working with?
Yeah, I love hearing about that one-on-one work. I was massively blessed by that when I was a university student, actually, that kind of one-on-one work. But I really find that Japanese guys benefit from that tremendously. I think there's this one guy, called him Mr. Y, and we've known each other for about 6-7 years now. And he was sort of a bit of Christianity in his background. He went overseas, actually, and difficult times, so slightly went along to a church there, returned to Japan. And there was sort of an openness in his heart to think about these things again, which his sort of mother or grandmother had maybe taught him. And so we started reading the Bible together. And we've just been reading the Bible together for about 6 years now. And I think just seeing the Lord work through him, actually. So he's just gradually, his wife's not a Christian. He's got this little 6-year-old daughter, and as we've been studying Mark's gospel, he's just changed, actually. And you can just see that kind of, and he's a very quiet guy, maybe typical Japanese, does things very properly, but very quiet as well. But just changing over the years, actually.
Thierry, can I just say something?
Yeah.
It sounds super daunting when you said, and then we just started reading the Bible together. Like, it is super daunting. Some people hear that and they're just like, well, what does it mean, start reading the Bible together? So how did you start?
Yeah, I think this
is the Caroline podcast.
Sorry.
So reading the Bible together with people, I just find it comes out of just getting to listening to people and understanding where they're coming from. Like you're saying with the one-to-one, you're asking, what's your purpose in life? As you do that, there's I go to a different guy. There's a guy I'm catching up with at the moment who has just returned from London, actually. And in London, he was struck by the number of churches. And he goes back to Japan with this question on his heart. Well, I've never really been taught about this churchy stuff, but I go to London and there's all these church buildings. What's that about? And you just hear his heart and there are questions. And so in answer to those questions, how about we look at the Bible a bit? And try and kind of, for him, the question of churches and the question of forgiveness and being irritated in the workplace, and just open the Bible. And then gradually just try and, okay, we've seen that, well, how about we read a book of the Bible together, maybe a gospel? Probably would begin there. So just where are they? And then how does that link to something in the Bible? Well, how about we just look at the Bible?
It's quite different, I suppose, when you think of a missionary who's gone to Japan like yourself. You often think of people, I don't know, standing on a soapbox or preaching in public places. It's a very quiet ministry, I suppose, to just do the one-to-one work. But that's never bothered you?
Yeah, no, I do think that the two work together. I think you want the public platform where you can have the Bible just taught faithfully week by week by week, publicly taught. That's super encouraging. But I think that the main bulk of the work is just the one-to-one friendships and where is someone at? Okay, well, what do we have that links to where they're at? and just get them in the Bible, I think.
I don't want to dwell too much on discouragements, Thierry, but Caroline's obviously shared some of the trickier times she's had. Have you faced any kind of pushback on your evangelism, or have the people you're working with faced pushback?
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's loads, actually. So one of the things that I've prayed for right from the beginning is, Paul writes something in 1 Corinthians 16. He writes, I will stay in Ephesus until Pentecost, for a wide door for effective work has opened to me, despite the many adversaries. And I think when you're doing stuff in Japan, you're aware of the adversaries. So even now, we've just started a kind of a new church, doing it once a month in the middle of the financial district, in a building, a kind of iconic building in the middle of the financial district. But the owners of the building still have in their rules no religious activities.
Okay.
And so even though we've got this sort of Sunday church, we're just doing this dance where we're living in a grey area. If someone was to complain, the owners would probably have to throw us out, because strictly speaking, and so there's that kind of challenge. But there's also just the very personal stuff. Like I remember one guy, let's call him Mr. O, who, we read the Bible. Actually, someone here at St. Helens read the Bible with this guy when he was doing 3 years in London, and he became a Christian and returned to Japan. And he and I then start reading the gospel. We're reading Mark's gospel together before his work. He was a securities guy, and so he'd start work at 8 o'clock. So we'd read the Bible. We'd meet at 6:30 to 7:30, and we'd done this for maybe a year and a half. And he'd really grown. He'd given his testimony at church. His wife, kind of Buddhist background, would come occasionally, but essentially, he just became successful at work, and then. He was probably my best friend, genuinely. My best friend in Japan was this guy. We'd met together once a week on a Tuesday before his work for a year and a half. And he just became, and that his heart being gripped by actually the desire for success. And he just stopped answering, my emails. And literally, he's never explained why, but this guy who I actually felt as like a best friend has stopped answering anything, because he doesn't really want anything to do with it. That's intensely personal, actually,
Painful.
isn't it?
And yet I think I can say that nothing is wasted in God's economy. And, 18 months after all the bags were taken and the investigation and stuff, someone in the lobby of my company stopped me and said, "Hey, Caroline, this leaflet, this booklet that you gave us for Christmas? I haven't read it yet, but it's on my to-read list."
wow.
And I was just like, what? 18 months later?
That's amazing.
So nothing is wasted in God's economy.
Mark, when things have been difficult in sharing the gospel at work, why don't you give up?
So what would be the difficulties? I guess we will all feel this, feeling like a lone voice, feeling like what we have to say is irrelevant, feeling like our colleagues have got everything together and just would not be interested in the gospel. But one of the things that I've been greatly encouraged by is lunchtime ministry, lunchtime talks, where I can come together with other Christians in other workplaces, and can be encouraged by what they're doing in their workplaces, and that motivates me to keep going.
So when you say lunchtime talk, what is that? That's like a lunchtime meeting of Christians?
So all around the city, there are meetings at lunchtime where Christians will gather. There will be encouragement from the Bible, but also time to meet other Christians and to talk about what we're doing in our workplaces. And I was, as I was thinking about this, I was reminded of a talk that I attended at St. Helens a number of years ago, where Charlie Screen was talking on Philippians. And I just thought it'd be wonderful to read the verse that we looked at to talk about the kind of encouragement that these talks can give us, from Philippians, where Paul says, "Only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or am absent, I may hear of you that you are standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, serving side by side for the faith of the gospel." And thinking about that in the context of Christians in their workplaces, standing for the gospel and doing it together and encouraging each other mutually. One person on their own is probably going to give up.
Yeah.
And praise God if they don't. But where a number of Christians can come together and to feel that we are, striving side by side for the sake of the gospel, that's an encouragement to me, and that's, I guess, what keeps me going.
Caroline, in the difficulties you've alluded to and you've shared with us already, what gospel truths have encouraged you to keep going?
As children of God, I think we underestimate how liberating and how amazing and how fulfilling it is to have a purpose in life. We totally underestimate it. And we know who we are, where we come from, where we're going, but our colleagues don't. And we want to love them. We want to look at them with the same eyes that Jesus looks at them. It's eyes of love. And if you love someone, then you will want them to know. So, yeah, I keep on going because I love the people. And yes, even the annoying guy, it happens everywhere. And maybe I'm going to take a cooling period with that person and focus on other people. But ultimately, it's our mandate, go and love the people and tell them about me, the great rescuer and the redeemer of their miserable life.
The purpose thing is incredible, isn't it? And, I think of my friends, and this might be a total shock to everyone. I'm still in my 20s, just about. Just. Birthday next week, if you're interested. But a lot of my friends, like, turning 30, and the purpose thing's suddenly very real, They've spent their adult life so far getting good jobs, going to Glastonbury, as your colleague did as well. And they're lying awake at night thinking, what am I doing here, actually? The Christian never has to do that. The Christian knows why God has put them here.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing truth, isn't it? Thierry, you've talked about some of the difficulties, but what sort of gospel fruit have you seen in Tokyo because of the ministries you've been involved in?
Yeah, I mean, it has been good to see the Lord at work, actually, whether it's just in individuals or more broadly speaking. Some of the things in my mind right at the moment are there's a really fun dinner we did about 4 weeks ago now. Okay. So there's been a little group at one of the Japanese banks that have been meeting for a few years now. And particularly just two guys are kind of the core. And they've gotten to know each other and become friends. And so we catch up. And we've had a few kind of people who are not yet Christians sort of in and around the group over the year, but sort of gone away, really. And so we kind of thought, well, what can we do? And so we put on a little dinner where each of us invited, or just actually those two and me, each of the three of us invited a non-Christian colleague or friend along. And so we just did a dinner on a Thursday night, came along, just had a chat. And it ended up being like a chat about mostly real estate, actually, like Japanese real estate and who wants to buy houses where and that kind of thing, and all the stuff related to that, and actually ghosts and spirits in houses and this kind of thing, random. But anyway, but one of the guys from that, it turned out that his daughter had actually become a Christian.
Oh, wow.
He had this daughter had become a Christian. He'd not told his colleague who invited him, but, and so he then was just really interested, and so came along to the little group that we did the following week. So I think seeing some of that has been real fruit. I think others has been, we've done church planting for 7 years and then city ministry. And church planting, we have seen actually that the initial church we helped plant grow numerically quite a lot. Okay. And probably about 60 people baptized over the 7 years. And then various other people coming and doing internships and then planting churches out of that. So in that sense, in terms of visible fruit, there's a chunk that we've seen, a chunk that's actually sort of become really difficult as well. But there's been visible fruit. I think that one of the ones that's really encouraged me recently, we did an event at Christmas where we basically got everyone involved in the lunchtime stuff. To, like Mark was saying, they're standing together. So we did an event at Christmas where 4 of them essentially preach the gospel. One guy particularly, one guy emceeing, and then one lady giving her testimony. A really clear presentation of the gospel in a kind of Christmas framework in December. And 109 people coming, and I think about a quarter were not Christians. So it was Christians inviting non-Christian colleagues. And one lady who went along to that, invited by a Christian colleague, went along, and she just heard the gospel clearly from Luke's gospel. Her small group, we had a talk and then small groups. Her small group leader followed up with her, took her along to church. And about 5 weeks ago now, she was baptized.
Oh, wow.
And just sent a text to me saying, "Oh, thank you so much for the work that you guys have been doing to make this happen." And so it's super encouraging, actually, hearing that kind of someone meeting Jesus from the lips of a worker in the area, plugged into a church, and just thankful for it.
Yeah, the people you're working with have become the workers doing the work.
Yeah, exactly.
I've got to ask, private dinner in Japan, what's on the menu?
So actually, this is a difficult question because left to themselves, even just the three of us, they'd have done something really luxurious.
Okay.
So maybe like a high-end sushi type thing, or, you know, and but because I was there, you know, I'm pretty cheap about these things, to be honest. And so we actually did, you know, Japanese obento. It's just like a packed lunchbox.
Yeah.
And so we did obento basically.
Okay.
So it was like we had a like pork, like fried pork, basically.
Okay.
They're very cheap, very easy. Yeah.
Sounds pretty good to me.
It's got my influence all over it, basically.
Mark, for our younger workers who are listening, maybe right at the beginning of their career, maybe in their first job, you know, feeling all the pressures that you spoke about earlier of their to-do list and pleasing their boss, how would you encourage them to be involved in gospel work? Why is it so worth getting involved in?
Yeah, I mean, I think yes, it's of eternal significance. So that's a good enough reason of itself. But I was thinking also that, you know, it's exciting. I'm an actuary, you know, I get excitement out of making nice spreadsheets. So maybe my bar for exciting is low. But I was recently in John's Gospel with a colleague with, you know, no background in Christianity really. And we were looking at Nicodemus and his encounter with Jesus. And you know, as we were reading through it, I was thinking, how's he going to respond to this? You know, Jesus is saying, "You must be born again, and it's only through me." And the reflection was, okay, so salvation is only through Jesus. Jesus does it all. You know, how good that actually Jesus does it for you. You don't have. It's not through your works. And when you know, are in the Bible like that with somebody, and you know, you see them coming to understand who Jesus is and what he does. You know, that's really exciting. And, you know, that made my day.
That is special.
Yeah, more exciting than any spreadsheet could be.
Caroline, a similar question for you, just as we close. Maybe for someone who's on the other end of their career, but they've never been involved in Bible teaching at work or sharing the gospel. Perhaps they've always kept work and faith separate. What would you want to say to encourage them?
When you say they are at the other end of their career, am I in the young camp or the old camp? I'm just want to clarify this because I think myself pretty young.
Sorry, I meant other ends from Mark's hypothetical interlocutor rather than you personally. Yeah.
So I have three things to encourage anyone at any end of their career to share the treasure. The first is look at your colleagues and love them. See their despair and love them and share the water that truly satisfies. The second is God doesn't make things randomly. He has put you, and if you're at the end of your career, you've worked 35 years in the same company, and he has put you in that spot so that you can uniquely touch the lives of the people around you. 1, 2, 20, we don't know, but this is the job that God has given you. And the last one is build lasting relationships, because life changes, right? Some days, some of my colleagues, everything is fine in their life, they're content, the money's good, the health is good, and they're just like politely or impolitely declining your request to get involved in their life and point them to Jesus. But then you keep on building the relationship, and then storms of life happen. And then you're there. The Lord maybe has softened their heart by then, and you're still there, and you want to tell them about the God who stills the sea. So build long-lasting relationship.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, guys, it's been so wonderful having you on the show. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and what the Lord has taught you. It's so wonderful to hear, so encouraging for me, and hopefully encouraging for everyone else as well. And it's been wonderful being here at Ashburnham with our fantastic live studio audience. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been the Bible Matters podcast. Good night.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bible Matters podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, why not give us a like or subscribe wherever you've been listening? We'd also love to hear from you, so please do comment with your thoughts on this episode, or feel free to email us on the email address in the show notes. The Bible Matters podcast is produced by myself, Tiff Carter-Whitley, and Leo Elborn. This is the Bible Matters podcast, encouraging you in faithful Bible teaching and ministry.